Welcome to this video about National 3, 4 and 5 melody and harmony concepts. Let's get started with scales and arpeggios. You might recognise the name of this song from the Aristocats movie. Scales.
And our scales are simply from C to C,
Arpeggios.
So we know that a chord is 3 notes, C, E, G, and then C again if we want to play at the top. But a broken chord is, or otherwise known as an arpeggio.
Octaves are the space between 8 notes, and you can hear an octave at the start of Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
An octave is the space that a scale spans, so from C to C. And a good way to think about this is the space between the 2 words at the start of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So you can hear that at the beginning there.
Stepwise motion is when we move notes up or down by a step, and you can see this in the video that follows on the stairs. Here's an example of contrary motion, when the notes in both parts move away from each other.
The next thing that we're going to look at is called contrary motion. Now what do I mean by contrary motion? Well, we're going to look and we'll start with the E here. So E is going to move up and back down again. Now C is here too. And this would be what's known as contrary motion when we have the E and the C. Now you would usually do this with 2 hands, but my filming setup, as you can see, is just allowing the use of 1 hand at the moment. So we would start with 1 finger on C and 1 finger on E, and they're going to move in opposite directions from each other, and that's what contrary motion is. So
Tones and semitones.
in music we refer to a lot of things as notes, but it's sometimes easier to refer to them and more clearer to talk about them as tones and semitones. So if we start with C here, we have C, and if we move up by a semitone we get C sharp. If we move up by another semitone we get D, and another we get D sharp. Up by a semitone we have E, and then up by a semitone from E we have F. E and F are a semitone apart from each other. They're not a tone apart. E and F sharp are a tone apart from each other. So if we're going to move up between C and C in semitones, it sounds like this. But if we're going to move up between C and C in whole tones, it will sound something like this. And that's because when we move up in semitones, we're moving up to make a chromatic scale, and when we move up in whole tones, we're moving up to make a whole tone scale. So if we're looking at the chromatic scale, the piano or the keyboard is a great instrument to do this with. As you can see, I've got lots of different colours on my keyboard, and that's for helping teach you guys how to recognise the notes by colour at first and then to look closer at the notation that we have here, and that notates where these notes on the piano are on a staff. But another word for colour is chrome or chromatic. So if something is chrome, then it's colourful, like you might have seen the logo for Google Chrome, that's nice and colourful. But if something is monochrome, then it means it's black and white. So if we're going to do a chromatic thing, then we're only going to use the black and white keys. Now there are only black and white keys on a keyboard instrument, so that means we're going to do a scale, a chromatic scale, using all of the keys. So if we start on C, it's going to sound something like this. And that's covering all the notes from this C to this C, including all the black notes. And it kind of sounds like something's rising up or it's falling down. The next scale that we're going to be looking at is called a whole tone scale. Now you might have noticed that the white and the black notes on the keyboard actually represent tones and semitones. And what I mean by that is that when we're talking about our steps, our white notes represent a step between each other. So there's a step between C and D, but there's a semitone between C and C sharp. That's a half step. So we have a tone, a tone, a tone, a tone, a tone, a tone, and a tone. However, in a whole tone scale, we're only going to move up the scale in whole tones. So we have C, D, E. Now our next whole tone is not F, it's F sharp. So we're going to move from E to F sharp. And our next whole tone is G sharp and A sharp. So our whole tone scale kind of sounds quite dreamlike. It sounds like this. And I always think it sounds like a dream sequence from a film. So just remember, the whole tone is making sure that we do 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, 5 step, and it's whole steps that we're doing, and that makes it sound like a whole tone scale.
Pentatonic scales.
So pentatonic scales have 5 notes in them. That's why they have the prefix pent. So we have 5 black notes here. We can also use the further 5 black notes. We can do it down here. Or we can even do it on the white notes. You'll notice that pentatonic scales can sound quite oriental. They're often used in Chinese music or Scottish music. You'll probably hear them a lot in Scottish music for National 5.
Let's have a look at chords, discords and chord changes.
A chord is often made up of 3 notes. We're going to be looking at chord C, which is C, E, G. So if something is atonal or clustered, it usually means that the notes are quite close together. So E, F sharp and G, they are not very tonal together, they don't sound very nice together. So a good way to tell something is atonal is if you can picture it being very close to each other on the keyboard, or if you just think that it really sounds too close together and too horrible. Like that. It sort of sounds in tune because we have our E and our G, but with that F sharp in the middle, it just
keys. Not the kind of keys that you open your door with, but these keys. Major, happy, or minor, sad. Have a listen, see if you can tell which is which. Now, throughout a song, the keys can change, and this is sometimes known as modulation of the key, or a key change. This is something that you might recognise from the song Farmer Refuted in Hamilton, where he sings, "Don't modulate the key, then not debate with me," after someone starts to sing in a different key. Here's an example, and you should also listen out for the counter melodies, how there are two main melodies going on at the one time. Now we're going to look at the Roman numerals and the chords in the key of C.
So if we are working in the key of C, then we're going to look at chords 1, 4, 5 and 6 in our major chords. Okay, so chord 1 in the key of C is just. Chord 4 is going to be the fourth note. So it's going to be an F, and that's going to be F, A, C. Chord 5 is going to be the next note up, so the fifth note of the scale, which is G, which is going to be G, B, D. And chord 6 in major form is going to be A. So we've got A, C sharp to make it major, and E. So we're going to look at cadences, and cadences are just a fancy word for endings, how something ends. So if we have a cadence that moves from G, that's G, B, D, to C, C, E, G, it goes. That's moving from chord 5 to chord 1, and so is known as a perfect cadence. So a perfect cadence is when the song ends with a move from chord 5 to chord 1. But there is such thing as an imperfect cadence, and that's when it moves from any other chord, so it could be 1 or 4 or 2, and it ends on chord 5, so that's G, B, D, or I'll play it up here, G, B, D. So we'll go from chord 4 to 5. And it's called an imperfect cadence because it doesn't quite sound finished. Even though we finished it here, we really want it to go back to here. But it's not going to. We're going to leave it here. And that's called an imperfect cadence.
Here's an example of me improvising, so just making a tune up on the spot. Let's have a look at some ornaments. Like these ornaments, they're used to decorate a piece of music.
There are a couple of different types of ornaments. They're mainly just used to decorate the piece a little bit. So instead of doing you might want to add some ornaments in there. So and this is a trill. And if we were to have a glissando between C and G, then it would go. So it's quite noisy on this keyboard unfortunately, but you're basically sliding between C and G.
This is a sequence, when the same notes are played one after the other, but at a higher or lower pitch. This is a question and answer, where it sounds like the parts are talking to each other. Basically, repetition is just repeating stuff. Next up is vamps. I don't mean that kind of vamp. I mean this vamp. If you look at the fangs, you'll see that on beat 2 and 4, where the fangs are also the chords. Now if we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll see we have bass chord, like this. Here's an example of a pitch bend. I play the pitch itself first and then bend the pitch later. Here is some scat singing. I often think of scat like Scooby Doo, because that's what the words sound like. Next we'll look at word setting. So word setting is the way that words are set to the music. We have syllabic, and syllabic is a way of setting a note to a syllable. And we also have melismatic, which is where we have lots and lots of notes to just the one syllable. And lastly, a vocal descant. Descants are improvised melodies sung in a high voice over a tune called a plain chant. Here the boy is singing the descant and the man is singing the plain chant. That's all for this video of National 3, 4 and 5 Melody and Harmony. Hopefully you found it helpful, and there should be more videos on the way soon. Please comment if there's anything else that you'd like to see, and thanks for putting up with my best efforts.